Charlemagne, the emperor who shaped Europe. Segment 1. The rise of the Carolingians. In the heart of 8th century Europe, the Frankish kingdom was a land of fragmented tribes and constant warfare. From this unstable world rose the Carolingians, a dynasty destined to reshape the continent. Charles Martel, Charlemagne's grandfather, had already secured fame by halting the Muslim advance at the Battle of Tours in 732. His victory laid the groundwork for the rise of a family whose influence would stretch beyond borders and centuries. When Pepin the Short, Charlemagne's father, seized the throne of the Franks with the blessing of the Pope, the bond between the Carolingians and the Church was forged. This alliance would prove critical, not only legitimizing their rule but also giving divine weight to their authority. Into this dynastic shift, Charlemagne was born a child destined for greatness. His lineage promised power, but it was his ambition and vision that would change Europe forever. Segment 2. Young Charlemagne, Prince of Promise. Born around 742, Charlemagne grew up amid the rigid discipline of a warrior culture. Though few details survive about his childhood, chronicles describe him as tall, commanding, and gifted with both physical strength and intelligence. From an early age, he witnessed the responsibilities of leadership, preparing him for the weight of empire that would one day rest upon his shoulders. As a prince, Charlemagne absorbed lessons in diplomacy, religion, and warfare. He was trained not just to fight, but to rule, developing the skills of a statesman in a world where alliances were fragile and kingdoms collapsed overnight. While many princes of his time sought only glory in battle, Charlemagne's ambitions stretched further. He envisioned a realm bound not just by conquest, but by shared faith and law. Segment 3. Crowning as King of the Franks. In 768, following Pepin's death, the Frankish crown passed to Charlemagne and his brother Carloman. Together, they were tasked with ruling a kingdom of diverse peoples, each with its own traditions and loyalties. Yet, partnership between the brothers proved uneasy, and Europe waited anxiously to see how this dual kingship would unfold. When Carloman died unexpectedly in 771, Charlemagne became sole king. For the first time, all Frankish lands lay under his singular command. It was a turning point that allowed him to pursue his grand vision of unity and expansion, guided by his belief in both divine mission and worldly ambition. Segment 4. Wars and Conquests. Building an empire. From the moment he gained full control, Charlemagne pursued a relentless policy of military expansion. His armies crossed rivers, scaled mountains, and marched across vast territories. Each campaign was not merely a quest for land, but a mission to bring order to restless tribes and extend the influence of Christianity. With each victory, Charlemagne's reputation as both a warrior king and a guardian of the faith grew. But conquest came at a cost. Battles were brutal, resistance was fierce, and entire regions had to be subdued again and again. Yet Charlemagne's persistence never faltered. By forging alliances, rewarding loyalty, and using sheer military might, he expanded Frankish territory until it stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube. His empire was not just a patchwork of conquered lands, it was the beginning of a united Europe under a single crown. Segment 5. The Saxon Wars. Faith and resistance. Among Charlemagne's most determined foes were the Saxons, a proud and fiercely independent people who clung to their pagan beliefs. For decades, Charlemagne waged war against them, returning year after year to crush rebellions and enforce Christian rule. These campaigns became a defining struggle of his reign, embodying both his resolve and his ruthless side. The Saxon wars were not simply battles of armies, but of faith and identity. Villages were burned, sacred sites destroyed, and countless Saxons baptized, sometimes by choice, often by force. While Charlemagne saw himself as a defender of Christendom, his methods were harsh, leaving a legacy of both admiration and fear. The eventual submission of the Saxons marked one of his greatest triumphs, but also revealed the darker cost of empire building in the Middle Ages. Segment 6. The Lombard campaigns in Italy. To the south, in Italy, the Lombards posed a threat not only to Charlemagne's expanding power, but also to the authority of the Pope. When Pope Hadrian I called for help, Charlemagne responded with decisive action. In 773, his armies crossed the Alps, a feat of endurance and courage that echoed the marches of ancient Rome. Facing the Lombards at Pavia, Charlemagne proved not only his military might, but also his willingness to defend the church. By 774, the Lombard kingdom had fallen, and Charlemagne took the Iron Crown of Lombardy for himself. This victory secured his reputation as protector of Rome and expanded his influence into Italy. More than conquest, it symbolized the deepening bond between the Frankish crown and the papacy. Charlemagne's dual identity as both warrior king and Christian champion was now firmly established, paving the way for his imperial destiny. Segment 7. The birth of the Carolingian Empire. With victories in Saxony, Italy, and beyond, Charlemagne's dominion stretched further than any Frankish ruler before him. His empire encompassed vast territories, uniting peoples of different languages and customs. Yet, he was more than a conqueror. He sought to weave these lands into a single entity bound by law, order, and faith. This emerging empire was not without challenges. Rebellions flared. Borders needed defending, and administration stretched thin. But Charlemagne's vision was unyielding. An empire rooted in Christian values and governed with strength and justice. For the first time since the fall of Rome, Europe glimpsed the possibility of unity under one crown, foreshadowing the rebirth of imperial authority in the West. Segment 8. Coronation as Emperor of the Romans. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, in the Grand Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, Charlemagne knelt in prayer. As he arose, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. In that moment, the legacy of ancient Rome was reborn in the form of a Frankish king. The coronation marked the beginning of what would later be known as the Holy Roman Empire. This act carried immense symbolism. It bound together the traditions of Rome, the authority of the Church, and the power of the Franks. To many, Charlemagne was chosen by God to restore order to Christendom. Yet the ceremony also sparked controversy, as it placed the papacy above the emperor, suggesting that kingship itself flowed from the hands of the Pope. Whatever its implications, Charlemagne's coronation secured his place as the central figure of medieval Europe. Segment 9. Charlemagne's court at Aachen. At the heart of his empire, Charlemagne established his royal court at Aachen, a city that became the symbol of Carolingian power. From this palace complex, adorned with a magnificent chapel inspired by Roman and Byzantine designs, the emperor ruled and dreamed of a new order for Europe. Aachen was not only a political capital, but also a cultural beacon, attracting scholars, clerics, and craftsmen from across the continent. Within these walls, Charlemagne fostered an atmosphere of renewal and ambition. His court was a gathering place where traditions of Rome, Christianity, and the Germanic world merged into something new. Aachen became the beating heart of the Carolingian Renaissance, where the emperor himself participated in debates, reforms, and celebrations that reflected both the grandeur of his rule and the vision he carried for the future of Europe. Segment 10. The Carolingian Renaissance. Charlemagne understood that true power lay not only in the sword, but also in the mind. Under his reign, Europe witnessed a revival of learning and culture that historians call the Carolingian Renaissance. He invited scholars like Alcuin of York to his court, establishing schools, preserving ancient manuscripts, and promoting literacy among clergy and nobility. For the first time in centuries, education became a tool of empire. This Renaissance was not merely academic, it was spiritual and cultural. The copying of texts preserved classical knowledge, while reforms in writing created the Carolingian minuscule script, a clear and practical handwriting that shaped European literacy for centuries. Through these efforts, Charlemagne planted the seeds of intellectual rebirth, ensuring that faith, governance, and culture would endure long after his battles were forgotten. Segment 11. Administration and law. Governing an empire, Charlemagne knew that a vast empire could not survive on conquest alone. To govern effectively, he established a system of administration that combined ancient traditions with innovative reforms. He appointed royal officials known as missi dominici, envoys of the Lord King, who traveled across the empire to ensure justice, loyalty, and fair governance. This network brought the emperor's authority directly to villages, monasteries, and markets far from his palace at Aachen. Law and order were central to Charlemagne's rule. He issued capitularies, written decrees that set standards for justice, taxes, and military service. These laws helped unify diverse peoples under common rules, reinforcing the idea that they were subjects of one empire. Though imperfect, Charlemagne's reforms brought structure to a chaotic Europe, creating the first steps toward centralized governance in the medieval world. Segment 12. Faith and the Church. Defender of Christendom. For Charlemagne, empire and faith were inseparable. He saw himself as both king and protector of the Church, defending Christianity from external threats while enforcing it within his borders. Churches and monasteries flourished under his patronage, serving not only as centers of worship but also as schools, libraries, and places of refuge. Yet his devotion to Christianity was complex. While he championed the spread of faith, he also demanded strict obedience, often by force. His campaigns against the Saxons revealed the darker side of his zeal, where baptism was sometimes offered at the edge of a sword. Still, too much of medieval Europe, Charlemagne was seen as a new David, a leader chosen by God to protect the faithful and bring unity to Christendom. Segment 13. Family, succession, and challenges. Behind the splendor of his empire, Charlemagne faced the private burdens of family and succession. He had numerous children by several wives and concubines, raising questions about inheritance and stability. Though he educated his sons and daughters with care, preparing them for leadership, the question of succession would haunt the twilight of his reign. External challenges also tested his empire. Raids from the north by Vikings, unrest in newly conquered lands, and pressure from rival powers constantly threatened the unity he had built. Charlemagne's strength lay not only in his armies but in his ability to adapt, negotiate, and inspire loyalty. Still, the vastness of his empire made it vulnerable, and the seeds of division were already being sown. Segment 14. The Twilight of a King. In his later years, Charlemagne's once mighty frame grew frail, though his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to govern with determination, issuing decrees and guiding his people even as age weighed upon him. Chroniclers describe him as a man who never abandoned his duties, embodying the very idea of kingship until his final days. On January 28, 814, Charlemagne died at Aachen, surrounded by the legacy he had built. He was buried in his beloved palace chapel, a place that would later inspire generations of emperors. His death marked the end of an era. Yet his memory endured as the greatest ruler of the early Middle Ages, a man who dreamed of unity and left behind a Europe forever changed. Segment 15. Charlemagne's legacy. Father of Europe. In the centuries after his death, Charlemagne's empire fragmented, yet his vision lived on. He became a symbol of unity, invoked by kings, emperors, and even modern leaders who sought to bring Europe together. The Holy Roman Empire, born from his coronation, endured for nearly 1,000 years, carrying his name and ideals across the ages. Today, Charlemagne is remembered as the father of Europe, a ruler whose ambition, faith, and reforms shaped the foundations of the continent. His story is not just about battles and crowns, but about the enduring dream of unity in diversity. From the halls of Aachen to the corridors of the European Union, Charlemagne's legacy continues to echo, reminding us that the past is never far from the present.